Now in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best 4.5 million defenders for your game week 1 drafts, and we're also going to be looking at the most optimal defensive rotations for the upcoming season. Now before we dive into today's video, of course, if you do enjoy any of the content that you see on the channel, please be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as we are trying to hit 15,000 before the start of the season, and it would be absolutely immense if of course we could hit that goal. We're getting closer and closer with every single video and stream we do, and I really think we've got the capability to of course do it with a few weeks leading up to pre-season. Let's start off first then with the defensive data from 11ify. As always, there is a link to their amazing website in the description if you want to go and check it out. But looking at the top teams, obviously we want to, try and find some 4.5 million defenders from, and it's a little bit tricky. As you can see, most of the top teams there don't have any 4.5 millions. Forest don't, Everton don't. The easiest one to get into is of course going to be Aston Villa, and my favourite pick from there is of course going to be Ezri Konsa. The guy just plays every single minute, and all the way up until match day 8 really, Villa have an absolutely fantastic fixture run that I think you guys should be looking to target, not only from a defensive perspective but also an attacking perspective as well. Like I said, they only play one of the top 5 from last season within their opening 8 games, so definitely worth taking a look at them as options. Newcastle don't have anybody coming in at 4.5. Palace do. They have Mark Gahey, who's an absolute gem every single season, and Palace's overall defensive data as well is really good, so I definitely think there's going to be some value found in there. Fulham also have some pretty decent options at 4.5. West Ham, Brentford and Bournemouth also have some pretty decent options as well. I probably would recommend avoiding kind of the bottom 3 teams for me personally: Sunderland, Burnley and Leeds. Obviously they're newly promoted. I think unless you're spending 4 million on a defender from there, that's fine, but 4.5 for me personally just feels like it's not worth investing in overall. But let's continue with the video. Before we dive into the data itself, I of course want to talk about Fantasy Football Hub, where a lot of today's data has come from. Of course, you can get your team rated for free in the description by the AI. It was something that I used a lot in pre-season last year to help me kind of identify the kind of issues that I'm having with my team. And of course, if you want to sign up for some of their other amazing features on the website, you can do that, and if you use my link, it helps the channel out, so it's a win-win for both of us, I guess. You get an amazing product and I get a little bit of kickback as well, so what's not to love with that one? Okay, so what I've done for this video is basically create a massive table of my favorite 4.5 million defenders that I've been looking at. We're obviously going to go through rotations afterwards. I'm going to do that in FPL.team, kind of just show you the best rotation, so you've got a visual kind of cue as well. I think sometimes you can just see the fixtures on screen. It doesn't really kind of, fill you with confidence, but that way we can go through each week and you can see which player you want to bench and which player you want to start. But first off, let's run through my big table that we've got here. It's an absolutely Goliath table. It took me a long time to put this together, so of course if you do enjoy it, please make sure you are liking it. As you can see, we've got goal involvements from last season, expected goal involvements, and then the defensive contribution points that the players would have scored last season, of course, if that metric was in the game. Now, a lot of the highest scoring players for that metric, of course, have been massively bumped up in terms of price. So of course your Murillos, your Tarkowskis are now coming in at 5.5 million. But hopefully with the aim of today's video, we're going to be able to find some that potentially could match their numbers, or at least get close for, of course, 1 million less. Because I do think overpricing them by a million, yeah, it's a little bit of a joke, to be honest, in my personal opinion. So let's start off with the most popular 4.5 million asset and the highest scoring one from last season. It is going to be Wan-Bissaka. 8 goal involvements for him, but as you can see, a massive overachievement in terms of his expected goal involvement as well. The defensive contribution points, 4, not too bad for a fullback, to be honest. There's definitely some players on here that you can see didn't even pick up any last season, so 4's not too bad, but it's not something I think Wan-Bissaka you would be expecting from him every single week. Now I understand why he is a popular asset, obviously with those 8 goal involvements. If people just filter 4.5 million defenders and look for the one that scored the most last season, he of course is going to come top of that list. They've got Sunderland away in game week 1, which of course is a great fixture. However, for large parts of the season, even when Graham Potter came in, they were an absolutely atrocious defence for expected goals conceded. We didn't see a massive uptake when, of course, Potter joined. There's not any kind of, new centre-backs joining either, so am I expecting this defence to be all of a sudden amazing overnight? Probably not, and I don't think the opening fixtures are that good. Like, they're not amazing in terms of it. Obviously, you've got the Sunderland away one in game week 1. I think if it was a home fixture, definitely probably would be more of a banker for a clean sheet. But away at the Stadium of Light and the return to the Premier League, you definitely feel like Sunderland maybe could get something out of that first game. Then Chelsea and Forest following that. Yeah, they don't feel like overall great fixtures. So I do feel like maybe Wan-Bissaka is potentially being a little bit overvalued this season. Now, he obviously had a really good spell under Graham Potter. He's Premier League proven. But like I said, it's not for one of the better defences in the league, and he massively overachieved on his over his data last season. So he could be one that could have a pretty big drop-off and could be one of those little bit of a trolls at the start of the season. Now, Guéhi is a defender I would absolutely love to own, but of course, unfortunately, the opening 3 fixtures just aren't great. If you can find the perfect rotation, which we'll be doing a little bit later, to of course supplement him, I definitely think he would be an option I would be considering. I genuinely can't believe that they priced Guéhi at 4.5 million. As you can see, 5 goal involvements last year for him. Only 6 defensive contributions, which isn't great. 6 points earned, sorry, that is, from the defensive contributions. But overall, Palace are a very good defensive side. They're always one of those sides that are towards the kind of, just outside of like the top 4 in terms of expected goals conceded. The 11FI data as well was pretty generous as well, given some of the difficult fixtures they've got across the opening 5 weeks. But like I said, if you can find the perfect rotation, I really, really like Marc Guéhi as a potential option. Same goes with Ezri Konsa as well. Again, just both of these guys are 90-minute men. The unfortunate thing I've found with Ezri Konsa is he didn't actually pick up any defensive contribution points last season. It doesn't look like he's the aggressor or the kind of, the more clearance out player. And this metric definitely suits teams that do kind of, obviously sit within a low block, and that isn't something that Ezri Konsa does or Villa do. They're actually quite aggressive and they play expansive football. So maybe he's not going to be one of those that will pick up defensive contribution points, but he is just a steady Eddie. And like I said, the Villa fixtures are very good. We saw that with the 11FI data, and we've also saw it as well if you just load up the FDR and look at their opening 8 set of fixtures. Like I said, only 1 game against the top 5 for last season. So again, feels like a very solid player for me. Next up, let's talk about the 2 Brighton boys. Obviously, we've got Van Heck if you want to go for the centre-back route, or you have got the more kind of, I would say, different option or kind of riskier option. Obviously, he's a new transferred in player. We don't know 100% if he's going to play. It is De Cooper, obviously, getting a lot of praise within the FPL community, and for very, very good reason, as you can see from the numbers that he put up in the Belgian League last season. And this isn't just last season as well. The season before, he had an absolutely cracking year, picking up 11 assists. So 6 goal involvements last year, but 11.8 expected goal involvement. That is genuinely ridiculous. That is unheard of for a defender, really. 11.8 expected goal involvements. This guy could be explosive this season as well. And Brighton's defensive data over the past few years hasn't been amazing, but if you can factor in maybe a couple clean sheets, and of course this guy just being an absolute magnet for expected goal involvement, then he could be a real explosive asset. I would massively prefer him over the likes of Van Heck. For me personally, I do think he, has the upside over him, because Van Heck, as you can see, isn't really getting too many defensive contributions anyway. So I probably would pick De Cooper and hope that he can start the season well and hopefully, nail down himself a regular starting position within the side. Comparing Kilman to Wan-Bissaka, that's actually where you might find a little bit of joy potentially, because you can see there, defensive contribution points, 10 for him last season, so not a bad kind of point scoring ability there. But like I said, I probably would just stick with Wan-Bissaka if I was going to target a West Ham defender. I just feel, maybe just stick with the numbers. If of course he does start picking up assists for fun like he did towards the back end of last season, at least you've got yourself covered with that way. Kilman doesn't have too much in terms of his overall expected goal involvements, and like I said, I wouldn't be banking on these defensive contribution points every single week. Let's move on to our Brentford pairing then. We've got Van der Berg and Coyote. Again, for me, I probably would prefer going for Coyote. I know his defensive, his data here doesn't look great, but of course he did only join the club in January, and I think he only started the last 6 games consecutively. The big reason that I like this guy, and it won't be picking up on the underlying data, is the fact that he's got an absolute giant of a long throw. By the way, just go and watch some of his long throws from last season. The guy can really sling in a ball. Of course, Brentford have just appointed their set piece coach as well, so you do feel like they're fully going to be playing for this metric every single single game. They're going to be looking for the set pieces. They're going to be looking for the long throws. And they've got a guy who's got, you know, Rory Delap 2.0 arm on him. So, yeah. And, of course, you do pick up assists. If, of course, it is a direct throw and someone then just headers it in. That picks you up an assist. So, yeah. Not a bad set of opening fixtures either for Brentford, especially that Sunderland away one looking pretty succulent, to be honest. But, again, they were a team that were pretty kind of poor in terms of their defensive numbers for last season. A large parts hanging around 16th, 17th for expected goals conceded. So I wouldn't be expecting too much from them as an overall defensive unit. Next up is going to be Anderson. This guy I think has huge potential. Didn't play too many games last season, was in and out of the Fulham side, but as you can see there, 16 defensive contributions, the most on this list, and I think if he gets himself a regular run within the side, he could be the one that could be, you know, that gem at 4.5 million, sorry, that could of course unlock the door in terms of those defensive contribution points. I think his numbers will probably be maybe a little bit less than of course the Tarkowskis and Murillos, but still, would it be worth that extra million on them? Probably not. So I think if you're going to try and target a centre-back at that 4.5 million range that has the potential to, of course, do well for the defensive contribution points, it is probably going to be looking like Anderson could be your man. I've put Agabodo, I believe it is, in this list as well. I just wanted to obviously give, you know, a little bit of coverage to Wolves. I still probably wouldn't go there. They've lost obviously a few key defenders this season. They were 18th, I believe, on the 11-5 metric as well in terms of the expected clean sheets. So yeah, probably an avoid. But I wanted just to, you know, give a little bit of coverage to them. Again, we'll try and find a rotation that works. Of course, Everton, you can see there in game week 3. Bournemouth in game week 2. Not a bad fixture either to be targeting. Let's move on to our two Bournemouth defenders in here then. We've got Senesi, who spent a large part of last season injured, only made 13 starts last season and managed to pick up 6 defensive contributions, which I don't think is bad in, of course, 13 starts. I think that's pretty decent, to be honest. And, of course, it's looking like potentially Zabania could leave. They've already lost Dean Højlund as well, so he's going to be one of their starting centre-backs. And if you remember back to the season before, the guy actually picked up 9 goal involvements in that campaign. So I think he could be a real gem, potentially going under the radar at that 4.5 million. Obviously not a great season last year, but hopefully this season can get himself fully fit after a pretty damning injury I believe he had. But yeah, like I said, he could be another one that could do exceptionally well in terms of goal involvement and of course in terms of those defensive contributions. Truffert is of course their replacement for Kirkes. He was a player that Liverpool looked at, and again another one that is doing exceptionally well in terms of the attacking threat, and definitely one you feel could be another explosive asset. Of course, as you can see there, underperforming on his XGI from last season. 4 goal involvements, 5.6 for him as well. So pretty decent overall attacking threat. And you do feel the way that Kirkes played last season, if he can replicate those positions that he was getting into, could be a mad asset to, of course, go for over the opening set of weeks. Let's finish up then with our final pairing. It is going to be Van de Ven and, of course, Udogie, the Spurs one. Again, I think Spurs players getting a lot of hype at the moment because, of course, they've got that Burnley at home fixture in game week 1. Of course, then match day 2, you are going to need to bench them, which is a little bit of a pain in the arse. But both of these guys had very injury kind of struck seasons. I mean, most of the Spurs players did, to be honest. It was a very hampered side for large parts of that season. Of course, a lot of people are going to be hoping under Thomas Frank they're going to be a much better defence because, again, they were hovering around a very similar position for expected goals conceded to Brentford, around that 16th, 17th, 18th place for large parts of the season. I think they actually finished 17th in terms of expected goals conceded. Now, it is going to be under a new manager, and you do think, you know, the Ange Ball system where it was pretty much, you know, just high line, risk it all, play for the attack, is probably going to be gone, and there's going to be a more conservative approach in the defence. So you do imagine that, you know, they're probably going to get some more points on the board. In terms of people picking Van de Ven over Udogie, hoping for potential defensive contributions as well, as you can see, Udogie actually got more last season. Both, like I said, played very limited minutes, so it's hard to call what they're going to be like this season for defensive contributions, but maybe just one to note. Let me know what you think of the table. Is there anybody that I potentially missed out there? Let me know in the comments who your favourite player is from the 4.5 million defender table, and let's head on then to some defensive rotations I think you guys should be lining up with in game week 1. Okay guys, here are some of my favourite defensive pairings that I think you potentially could go for the start of the season. So let's start off first with Bournemouth and West Ham. As you can see here, you'd obviously play Wan-Bissaka in game week 1 with the Sunderland fixture. Then they have Chelsea, and you bring in the Truffet or Senesi, of whoever you want to go for there, with Wolves at home. Heading into game week 3, you've got probably, I would say, the most difficult choice here. Depending on how Spurs start the season, you could, of course, go with Bournemouth. But Nottingham Forest away isn't too bad for Wan-Bissaka. Heading into match day 4, you'd obviously pick Truffet at home against Brighton. Game week 5, again, you're probably going to go with Wan-Bissaka against Crystal Palace, but not a bad fixture, of course, if you wanted to go for Truffet as well there. Heading into 6, both of them have a great fixture, so of course you would be looking at other rotations with that one. Heading into game week 7, you would obviously go with Truffet with Wan-Bissaka away at Arsenal as well. And then the final week as well, we'll only go up to game week 8 for these ones. But as you can see here, Truffet and Wan-Bissaka, again, both having a decent fixture, but you probably would play Wan-Bissaka ahead of Truffet for that week. Moving on to another rotation that you potentially could go for, it is Spurs and Brighton. Obviously, you potentially could play both in the opening week, but if you had to pick one, you probably would pick a Dogi. Heading into game week 2, obviously they've got Everton away. Spurs have Manchester City away, so you'd obviously play De Cooper. Heading into game week 3, De Cooper has City, Bournemouth for Adogi, so you'd obviously play him. Game week 4, both have a pretty decent fixture, but off the basis of last season, you probably would pick Adogi, given how good Bournemouth were at attacking. Game week 5, again, probably would go for the Brighton option, in my opinion. Maybe you go with the home team. Again, they face off against each other in 5, so it's a little bit of a difficult decision with that one, but obviously you'll have to see how either of them line up for the start of the season. In 6, you bench the Cooper. You play, obviously, Adogi against Wolves. 7, again, you could very easily probably play both of them. Leeds is probably the standout option. And then finally, in game week 8, you probably pick... It's again, a bit of a toss-up, really, between the two. But at least you've got yourself a decent option for both of those weeks. And then the final rotation is going to be Fulham and Wolves. So, obviously, you'd play Anderson for match day 1. Then you'd probably, I would say, probably stick with Anderson again, given how poor United were. But again, depends how they look. Match day 3, obviously you'd pick Agboa with Everton at home. Match day 4, you'd obviously go to Fulham with Anderson facing off against Leeds. Match day 5, you could very easily play both of them as well, with great fixtures for both. Match day 6 is probably the most difficult week out of the lot, and you probably would select Anderson for that week. Match day 7, again, you probably would back the home team, but again, you've not got a bad option either with Anderson. And then finally, match day 8, you've got a clear option to, of course, bench Anderson if you did want to go through that one. Of course, there are plenty of more defensive rotations, and I could sit here for hours presenting plenty of good options, but those are the ones that I like at the moment, and the ones that I'm potentially looking through as well. Of course, you can factor in your premium defenders with this. This is probably one of the best recommendations I would have for you guys for the upcoming season. Head over to FPL.team, put your whole defense in, and pretty much just flick through the weeks and see how the defense is lining up every single week. I think it's a really, really good way to understand which kind of teams you probably need to target and where you need certain players, especially the cheaper budget options within that defense as well. So that would be my top recommendation. Of course, if you did enjoy today's video, make sure you're liking and commenting as well, as it does mean the absolute world to me. And like I said at the start of the video, we're trying to hit 15,000 subscribers. So of course, if you do want to help me hit that goal, make sure you are hitting that subscribe button. But yeah, thank you very much, and the best of luck for game week 1.